My name is Althea. I'm 26 years old. I still remember the day I first stepped into that courtroom. The heavy air seemed to press down on me, and I felt the coldness of the room seep into my bones. I was only 15, but the weight of everything that had happened in my young life already felt like a lifetime's burden. The high, gleaming walls of the courtroom towered around me, and the cold steel of the judge's bench felt like an insurmountable wall. I could hear the shuffle of papers, the clinking of pens, and the murmurs of the lawyers as they prepared for the proceedings. My aunt stood beside me, her figure a bit smaller than I remembered, as if the years had taken more from her than anyone knew. She had always been strong, but today she seemed fragile. The woman who had taken me in after my mother's death now stood before a judge, seeking justice, not just for herself, but for me. At 13, I had been thrust into a world I had never expected. One day, my mother had been there, holding my hand, guiding me through life with the warmth of her love. The next, she was gone, and the world had crumbled. I found myself placed under the care of my aunt, a woman who had no children of her own and whose life was already complicated by struggles of her own. But she loved me, and she took me in without a second thought. She gave me everything she could, but it was never enough. I was just a kid trying to survive, and she was a woman trying to manage a life that had never been easy. The nights were often long and filled with quiet struggles. I remember hearing her whispering on the phone to different people, trying to figure out how to pay the bills, how to make sure I had what I needed for school, how to buy the shoes I had grown out of. Her sacrifices went unnoticed by most, but I saw them. I watched as she stretched every dollar to the limit, worked long hours, and went without so I could have what I needed to live. She never complained, never let me see how much pain it caused her. But still, there was always a shadow hanging over us, a reminder that there was so much more that she could never provide. And then came the day we ended up in that courtroom. My aunt stood before the judge, holding an envelope, the contents of which were more than just numbers on a page. She carefully pulled out her invoice, the one that listed every cent she had spent on raising me after my mother's death, food, clothes, shelter, everything. The total came to a staggering $50,000. I could see her fingers trembling slightly as she handed it to the judge, her eyes not meeting mine as though afraid to see the disappointment I might feel. It was clear she was asking for something, but there was more at play here than just the numbers. There was the story behind them, the love, the struggle, the sacrifice. The judge, a man whose face seemed stern but fair, picked up the invoice and began reading it carefully. His eyes skimmed over the lines, the figures adding up in his mind. For a moment, there was only silence in the room. It felt like the world had stopped spinning, as if everything had slowed down to let this moment sink in. I watched as the judge finished reading, then looked up at my aunt. His next words hit me like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile bubble of peace I had been trying to hold on to. "Where's the $190,000 in Social Security benefits you collected?" he asked, his voice calm but sharp, like the sound of a knife cutting through the air. The question hung in the air like a heavy weight. I could feel my chest tighten as I looked at my aunt. Her face drained of color, the confidence she had held earlier now replaced by a mixture of shock and disbelief. I had no idea what he was talking about. Social Security benefits. What had they to do with this? My mind raced as I tried to piece together the fragments of information that had never quite made sense to me. Hadn't we been receiving those benefits for me after my mother passed away? Hadn't they been meant to support me while I navigated life without her? The courtroom erupted. Lawyers began talking over one another. Witnesses looked at each other in confusion, and I felt the world closing in around me. Whispers spread like wildfire, people trying to make sense of what had just been revealed. My aunt's head was down now, her hands clenched in her lap, but the truth had already been laid bare. The Social Security benefits, which should have been used for my care, had gone missing. It was a moment of truth, a moment I couldn't have prepared for. I had spent so many years trusting my aunt, believing in her love and dedication. She had taken me in when no one else could or would, and I had never questioned her decisions. But now, the reality was sinking in. The money that should have been used to provide for me, to ensure my future, had disappeared. My mind raced with questions. Where had it gone? Why hadn't I known? How could I have been so blind? I stood there in that courtroom, frozen, as the sound of my aunt's sobs began to fill the silence. The courtroom was alive with the sound of voices, but I couldn't focus on them. All I could hear was the deafening beat of my own heart, pounding in my chest. The trust one had placed in my aunt had been shattered. The truth had come out, and there was no going back. But even as the reality of betrayal settled over me, I knew one thing for sure: I would fight. This wasn't just about money, it was about my future. About me. About finding my way, no matter how many times I was knocked down. And in that moment, I realized the strength that lived inside me had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to be called upon. The moment the judge's words hit the air, everything around me seemed to crumble. My aunt's face went pale, and I could see the shock in her eyes, as if she hadn't expected that question, as if she hadn't prepared for what was coming. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls stretching and compressing with the pressure of the moment. I had been standing there, quietly, trying to hold on to some semblance of control, but as the weight of the judge's words sank in, I felt a deep, unsettling feeling wash over me. My aunt had been the one to take me in when I had no one else, the one to offer me love when I thought there was no hope left. And yet, now it felt like she had been hiding something that was too big for me to comprehend. I remember how the room filled with whispers. Lawyers were leaning forward, their pens scratching against paper as they jotted down notes, trying to make sense of what had just been said. The courtroom, which had once seemed like a place of authority and order, now felt like a stage for a tragedy unfolding in slow motion. My heart was racing, and my palms grew clammy as the world around me seemed to spin. I stood frozen in the middle of it all, my eyes glued to the floor, trying to block out the noise, trying to shut out the weight of the question that had just been asked. But it kept echoing in my mind. Where's the $190,000? I looked at my aunt, and for the first time, I saw her for what she was, not just in that moment, but in the years leading up to it. She had always been the person I looked to for comfort, for strength, for reassurance. She was my rock, the one who gave up everything to ensure I would survive in a world without my mother. But now her eyes, those eyes that had always been filled with love and care, looked like they were searching for something, anything, to hold on to. It was as if the ground had been ripped from beneath her feet, and she had no idea how to get back up. I didn't know what to feel. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, and the hurt and confusion I was experiencing had begun to suffocate me. The Social Security benefits, money that was supposed to provide for me, secure my future, and ensure I had what I needed to grow into the person my mother had hoped I would become, had gone somewhere I couldn't trace. And that left me with an unsettling question. How had I been so unaware? For so long, I had been the child, the one who didn't understand the full weight of finances, the one who didn't know the difference between $1 and $1,000. But now I was old enough to grasp the truth, to see the consequences of those missing funds. The years of sacrifice my aunt had put into raising me now felt like a distant memory, eclipsed by the unsettling knowledge that there had been another layer to our relationship that I had never fully understood. The woman I had trusted, the one who had always been there for me, was now standing before me with a truth that was impossible to ignore. I had grown up believing that the world was simple, that love and sacrifice were all that mattered, that they were enough to overcome anything. But in that moment, I began to understand the complexities of life, the hidden truths that can lie just beneath the surface. My trust, once so solid, had been shaken to its core, and I had no idea how to move forward from here. All I had ever known about love, about family, seemed to be tangled up in a web of confusion and betrayal. The whispers around me only grew louder. Some were questioning how it could have happened, how such a large sum of money could have simply disappeared without anyone noticing. Others were shocked, unable to process the implications of what the judge had revealed. The tension in the air was palpable, thick like the smoke of a fire you could smell but not see. Everyone was waiting for something, an explanation, a reason, something that would make sense of this revelation. But all I could hear in my mind was the question, where had it gone? My aunt remained silent, her hands trembling in her lap, her gaze never quite meeting mine. I wanted to speak, to say something that would make the hurt go away, but I couldn't find the words. What could I say? How could I defend the person who had always been my protector when now it felt like she had betrayed me? The courtroom was a blur, a cacophony of voices that all sounded the same, all asking the same questions, all trying to make sense of the impossible. The judge, looking down from his bench, seemed to hold a quiet authority in the chaos, his expression unreadable. It was clear that the court had to investigate further, that the question of the missing money was only the beginning of something much larger. But in that moment, I didn't care about the investigation. I didn't care about the legalities or the next steps. All I wanted was to understand why, to know what had happened, to find the answers that had been so carefully hidden from me. I felt a deep sense of loss, not just for the money that had disappeared, but for the trust that had been shattered. My entire life had been built on the belief that family would always be there, that love and sacrifice were enough to see me through the darkest times. But now, I saw that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. There were hidden truths, things that no one had told me, things that had been buried beneath layers of good intentions and false assurances. As the judge called for a recess, the world around me seemed to spin. My aunt stood, her face a mask of sorrow, and I watched as she walked out of the courtroom, her shoulders hunched, her head down, a person broken by the weight of her own actions. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never see things the same way again. The loss of trust was not just about money. It was about everything I had believed about love, about family, and about the people who were supposed to protect me. The truth had been revealed, but it left me with more questions than answers. And the only thing I could do was face them head-on. As the judge's words echoed through the courtroom, I could feel every inch of my body freeze in place. I didn't know what to expect. This wasn't something anyone had warned me about. My aunt, the woman who had been my mother in every sense since I lost mine, had been the pillar I leaned on. She had carried me through the years, giving everything she had, never asking for anything in return. But now, everything I thought I knew about her, about our family, was crumbling before my eyes. I looked at her. Her expression had shifted from the quiet determination that had carried us both through the darkest days of our lives to one of complete bewilderment. She wasn't the strong, unwavering woman I had come to know. She was a stranger to me now, standing there with a vulnerability I had never seen in her before. The room was still, and the question hung heavy in the air like a cloud about to burst. Where had the $190,000 in Social Security benefits gone? I had spent years thinking the benefits had been used for my education, my well-being. They were supposed to be the safety net, the promise that I would never have to worry about the basic things: food, clothes, a roof over my head, things that my aunt had always worked so hard to provide. She had never once mentioned the funds, never let me see any of the financial struggle. To me, it had always been a given that she was doing everything for me, as any mother would. But now, that certainty had been replaced by confusion. The judge's calm but direct question had shattered that illusion. His voice, though steady, felt like a thunderclap in the silence. The ripples of shock spread through the courtroom as the realization of what was being uncovered set in. My aunt hadn't just been raising me out of her own pocket, at least not entirely. There had been money, a significant amount of money, set aside for me. But now, it was clear that money was unaccounted for, and the path it had taken was shrouded in mystery. I could hear the whispers starting to fill the room. They were soft at first, like a breeze gently moving through a field, but they quickly became louder, more insistent. Some people were asking how this could happen. Others were looking at each other in disbelief. I felt like I was being suffocated by the noise, the shifting of opinions, the gasps of surprise. I wanted to shut it all out, to make the world go quiet again, to go back to the way things were before this moment, but it was impossible. As I stood there, my eyes fixed on my aunt, I realized I had never truly understood the complexity of the world around me. I had always been the child in this relationship, the one who received but never questioned. I had never considered the nuances of financial transactions or the weight of promises made with no expectations of return. I had never thought that there might be something beneath the surface, something hidden from view, something that might explain why things were never as simple as they seemed. But now the truth was unfolding, and with it, a torrent of emotions I hadn't known I was capable of feeling. Anger, betrayal, and confusion welled up inside me, each one cutting deeper than the last. How could she have kept this from me? Why didn't I know? I had trusted her with everything, and in return, She had given me all of her love and dedication. I had thought she was the one person in my life who would never let me down, but here I was, standing in a courtroom, watching as the truth came to light and shattered everything I had known. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to ask her how she could have let me live in ignorance all these years. But the words caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. I couldn't bring myself to look her in the eye and demand the truth, not when I saw the sorrow etched on her face. She wasn't the villain in this story, at least not in the way I had imagined. She had been the one who carried me when I couldn't walk, the one who raised me with her heart and soul. And now, in this moment, she was the one who was being accused of betrayal. And yet, despite all the pain, the betrayal, and the confusion, there was a part of me that couldn't let go of the love I had for her. She was still the woman who had held me when I cried, the woman who had wiped away my tears, the one who had taught me the meaning of sacrifice. Even as the truth of the missing money unfolded, I couldn't deny the years of care and devotion she had shown me. It wasn't black and white. There were no easy answers, no simple way to process what was happening. The courtroom had gone quiet again, the energy now shifting from chaos to anticipation. Everyone was waiting. The judge, who had been watching the exchange closely, now turned his gaze back to the documents, his expression unreadable. He knew the significance of the question he had just asked, but there was still so much more to uncover. My aunt was still silent, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the floor. I wanted to reach out to her, to offer some comfort, but the distance between us felt too vast, too insurmountable. The trust one had in her had been broken, and though I could see the regret in her eyes, I didn't know if I could ever get that trust back. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't understood before. Trust, once shattered, was a fragile thing. Even the deepest of bonds could be cracked, and though you might try to piece them back together, there would always be a jagged edge where it had broken. The reality of what was happening was sinking in, and with it, a painful lesson I had to learn the hard way. The world wasn't simple, and the people you love and trust can sometimes let you down in ways you never expected. But it was also a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, would always come to light. And though it hurt, the truth would eventually guide me toward the path I needed to take, whether I was ready for it or not. The question that had just been asked hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. It felt like the ground beneath me was shifting, the walls of the courtroom closing in tighter and tighter with every passing second. My thoughts scrambled, trying to make sense of it all. The years of living with my aunt, the years I had thought I was cared for, loved, protected. How had I not known? The Social Security benefits, money that was supposed to secure my future, had never been mentioned by her. It felt like a dark cloud had descended, and all the warmth and certainty that had once surrounded our relationship had dissipated into nothingness. The courtroom had erupted into a frenzy of voices, a cacophony of lawyers discussing the legality of the missing funds, witnesses mumbling to each other in confusion, and the rustle of papers being shuffled as the reality of the situation started to settle in. Some people were asking how this could have happened. Others were staring at my aunt, as if waiting for her to speak up, to explain, to offer some kind of justification for what had just been revealed. But she didn't speak. She sat there, her hands trembling in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor, seemingly unable to face the world. I had always admired her strength. She had been the one person who had stepped in when I needed her most, the one who had cared for me when I had no one else. She was my mother's sister, the person who had promised her she would look after me, that she would make sure I was okay. But now all of that seemed so hollow, so empty. How could she have let this happen? How could she have kept something so monumental from me? All the times I had looked to her for guidance, for comfort, now seemed tainted with the realization that perhaps I didn't know her at all. My mind raced as I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling like I was watching someone else's life unfold before my eyes. The anger and frustration were overwhelming, yet it was the confusion that gnawed at me the most. What was the real story behind those Social Security benefits? Where had they gone? Why hadn't I been told? How had I, as a child, trusted so completely in a system I didn't understand? The answer to that question seemed so far out of reach, buried somewhere deep beneath the years of love and sacrifice my aunt had shown me. I could hear the murmurs continuing around the room, but none of it mattered. My focus was entirely on her, on the woman I had believed to be my guardian, my protector, now reduced to a shell of her former self. Her silence spoke volumes, but it wasn't the silence of someone who was ashamed. No, it felt more like the silence of someone who had been caught in a lie so deep, so profound, that there were no words left to explain it. And then, I saw something in her eyes. For a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of vulnerability, something I hadn't seen before, not like this. It was as if she were searching for something inside herself, looking for a way to make sense of what had just happened. But there was no easy way to explain it, no way to justify the missing money. No matter how much she loved me, no matter how many sacrifices she had made, this truth couldn't be undone. The money was gone, and with it, the trust one had placed in her. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. He was calm, almost detached, as though he had seen this all before. His question had been simple, but its ramifications were enormous. The court proceedings would have to continue, and there would be an investigation. But in that moment, none of that mattered to me. I didn't care about the legalities or the next steps. All I could think about was the empty space between me and the woman who had once been my everything. I wanted to scream, to shout at her, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood there, frozen, watching as the courtroom slowly began to quiet. The buzz of voices died down, replaced by the rustling of papers and the quiet murmur of the court's activities as people tried to process what had just been revealed. It was like the world had stopped spinning, like time had slowed down, and I was caught in a moment that I couldn't escape from. I watched my aunt as she sat there, her face pale, her hands still clasped tightly together in her lap. She didn't look up. She didn't speak. She just sat there, as though she were waiting for something, waiting for the inevitable storm to pass. But I knew it wouldn't pass, not this time. The truth had come to light, and there was no going back. Everything that had been hidden, everything that had been left unsaid, was now laid bare. The courtroom began to settle into a strange kind of quiet, a hush that followed the chaos of the revelation. But my mind was still whirling, caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. The woman I had loved and trusted, the one who had raised me, had kept something from me that had changed everything. And now, all I had left was the shattered remnants of my trust, scattered like broken glass at my feet. I had never imagined that something like this could happen, not to us, not to our family. We had always been so close, so bound together by love and shared history. But now, all that was left was a question. How do you rebuild something when the foundation has been cracked beyond repair? I had always believed that love was enough to overcome anything. But now, I was beginning to realize that trust, true trust, was something that couldn't be taken for granted. It had to be earned, and once it was broken, it was not easily restored. In that moment, I felt like I had been left to pick up the pieces of my own life. There was no way to go back, no way to undo what had been done. The truth had come, and with it, the realization that my relationship with my aunt had changed forever. No matter what happened next, no matter how the situation unfolded, I knew one thing for sure. My perception of the world, and of the people I had trusted, would never be the same again. The innocence I had carried with me for so long had been stripped away, leaving behind only the harsh reality of betrayal. The weight of the moment seemed to press down on me like a heavy, suffocating blanket, and everything around me felt distant, unreal. My thoughts were a blur, spinning in a chaotic whirlwind that I couldn't escape. The courtroom had fallen into an eerie quiet, but within me, the world was unraveling. My aunt, the woman who had promised to care for me, who had held me when I was scared, who had given me everything she had, was now the center of an undeniable storm. The question the judge had asked, where was the $190,000 in Social Security benefits, had ripped through my life like a jagged tear, and I couldn't seem to comprehend the depth of what was happening. The room felt so far away, and yet it was all too close. I couldn't stop staring at my aunt, her shoulders hunched and her hands still, trembling slightly in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, and for a moment I wondered if she was even aware of the room around her. How had she arrived at this moment, and how had I not seen the signs? The years of care, the seemingly endless sacrifices, had they all been in vain? I had trusted her with everything, but now, in the face of the unspoken truth, I didn't know where that trust had gone, or whether it had ever truly been there at all. The courtroom had erupted when the judge asked his question, a wave of whispers spreading like wildfire. Some people were confused, some were outraged, others were just watching in stunned silence, trying to make sense of a situation. It felt like a dream, a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. The harshness of it all, the betrayal that had been hiding beneath the surface, the way everything I thought I knew about our life together had come undone in an instant, left me paralyzed. And yet, despite the overwhelming shock and confusion, there was a strange, almost painful clarity in that moment. The money had been missing for years, and I had never known. All those times when we struggled to make ends meet, when I thought my aunt was working so hard to give me the best life she could, had she been hiding the truth from me? Had she been withholding something that was meant for me? Something that could have made all the difference. The silence in the courtroom now felt oppressive, every second stretching out as I waited for someone, anyone, to make sense of it all. I looked around the room, at the faces of the lawyers and the judge, who were all silently processing the gravity of what had just been revealed. But it was my aunt's face that held my gaze. Her expression was unreadable, her lips pressed together in a thin line, her eyes downcast, avoiding mine. I wanted to reach out to her, to ask her why, to demand the truth, but the words stuck in my throat. What was I supposed to say? How could I ask her something that I didn't even understand myself? She had always been my protector, my guide, my family. She had been the one person I trusted above all else, and yet, here she was, standing in front of me as a stranger. It wasn't just the missing money that stung. It wasn't just the fact that something as important as the Social Security benefits had disappeared into thin air without me ever knowing. It was the realization that I had been living a lie, that the love and security I had felt from her, the foundation I had thought was unshakable, had been built on something that wasn't entirely real. For years, I had believed that she had given everything for me. And in a way, she had. But what did that even mean now? What was the value of all her sacrifices when something so crucial had been hidden from me? I didn't know what to feel. The anger was there, bubbling just beneath the surface, but so was the sadness, the crushing disappointment. And somewhere deep down, there was even a sense of guilt, for not knowing, for trusting too easily, for not asking the questions I should have asked. Maybe if I had been more aware, if I had been more mature, I could have seen the signs, caught the discrepancies, figured out the truth before everything exploded in front of me. But now, all I could do was stand there, frozen in place, as the world around me continued to move forward without me. The judge's voice interrupted my thoughts, and I slowly turned my head to look at him. He had asked his question, and now the room seemed to fall silent again, waiting for the next step. But all I could think about was my aunt. Where had she gone? How had this happened? She had been the one person I thought I could count on, the one constant in my life. But now, her silence was deafening, and I didn't know how to reconcile the person I had known with the one standing in front of me. She had always been my rock, the one who had held me when I cried, the one who had stepped in when I lost everything. She had always shown me how to love, how to be kind, how to persevere. But now, I was beginning to see her as someone else entirely. The woman who had once been my caretaker was now someone whose actions I could no longer understand. And it hurt. It hurt more than I could have ever imagined. I wanted to scream, to yell, to make her explain herself, to ask her why she had kept this from me. But I knew that the words wouldn't come out the way I wanted. My emotions were so tangled, so raw, that even if I tried, I wouldn't be able to get the answers I needed. What would I even say? How could I confront the person I had loved and trusted, who had always been there for me, with something so incomprehensible? I could feel my chest tighten as the realization hit me. I didn't know her the way I thought I did. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. The courtroom had begun to move again, but for me, everything had stopped. It was like I was trapped in a space between worlds, unable to move forward or backward. The moment was too heavy, the truth too sharp. All I could do was wait. Wait for my aunt to speak. Wait for the judge to continue the proceedings. Wait for the inevitable flood of emotions that would follow. But for now, the silence in my heart was the loudest noise of all. As the days passed, the storm that had torn through my life began to settle. The courtroom proceedings continued, but for me, they were no longer the center of my world. The truth had been laid bare, And while the path forward was uncertain, one thing had become clear. I could no longer look at my aunt the same way. She had been the one person I had trusted with everything, and now that trust had been shattered, leaving behind a jagged, painful void. But amidst the heartbreak and confusion, something began to shift inside me. The anger and betrayal, while powerful, started to give way to something else: understanding. The reality of the situation was harsh, but it was also a wake-up call. I had spent so many years living in the comfort of a world that seemed secure, but now I understood that nothing in life was guaranteed. Trust, love, and family were fragile things, and sometimes, even the people we rely on most can fail us. Despite everything, my aunt was still the person who had raised me, who had given me a place to call home when I had no one else. Her love for me had been genuine, even if her actions hadn't always reflected that truth. And while the betrayal would always leave a scar, it didn't erase the years of care and sacrifice she had put into raising me. In the end, I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting or excusing the mistakes that had been made. It was about moving forward with the knowledge that life, no matter how painful, is full of lessons. The betrayal, while deep, had forced me to confront the complexities of trust, family, and forgiveness. It would take time to rebuild what had been broken, to learn to trust again, not just in others, but in myself. And while I couldn't change the past, I could control how I chose to move forward. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew that I was stronger for having faced the truth, for having seen the cracks in my world and still standing. Life was never as simple as it seemed, but as long as I kept moving forward, I knew I would find a way to navigate it, no matter how difficult. The healing would come, in time. But for now, I knew one thing for sure: my story wasn't over. It had only just begun.